Good. Welcome to this LinkedIn live audio with James Dorsey. Welcome, James.
Pleasure to be with you.
It's a big pleasure to have you. It was quite spontaneous, actually. We wrote like when was it? Yesterday or 2 days ago?
Indeed.
Yesterday, I think, and to connect first to get to know each other, and then to set this for today. So thanks you for being available so spontaneously. And I'm really looking forward to discuss this topic with you, where you are a great expert. So we
Well, as Socrates said, the more you know, the less you know.
That's true. The more you know, the more questions come up. This event is hosted by the COPC Network, Conflict Transformation, Peace Building and Security Network. We are a LinkedIn group with about 46,000 members and also a LinkedIn page. So the events run on the page. If you want to be informed for further talks and events, please also connect on the page, the COPC page on LinkedIn. And it's an open mic today. We will do that at the end. So we'll first have the discussion, James inputs, and then the last maybe 15 minutes, so at half past or something, we'll start the open mic session. The recording will be published. If the recording works, it was a bit ingenious. I had to find a workaround, but it seems to work. It seems to be recording on my side. So we will also publish this. If you step in at the end, know that you are also recorded and your questions are recorded. And with that said, we can start. So we have James, Dr. James M. Dorsey here today. You're an Adjunct Senior Fellow at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies. An award-winning journalist and scholar, you serve as a Senior Fellow at the National University of Singapore's Middle East Institute. And you're an author of the influential blog, The Turbulent World of Middle East Soccer, which is also a title of one of your main books. You have published widely in peer-reviewed journals and many other publications. And how much is it? I think you have 4 decades of experience or something, right?
That's unfortunately true, yes.
Well, I think participants are happy to have you with your 4 decades of experience on this talk today. You published also with Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and others. So we're really extremely honored to have you here. Your blog is jamesmdorsey.net, which I can recommend.
Well, the best is to go to Substack, which is jamesmdorsey.substack.com.
Perfect.
And I changed the name. For many years, it was the Turbulent World of Middle East Soccer. And I changed it about a year ago to the Turbulent World with James M. Dorsey because the sports element of it was severely reduced as I started writing about the same things, but not through a sports angle.
Okay, but it remained turbulent.
Turbulent it remains.
Exactly. Good. And another book also that I saw, The Battle for the Soul of Islam, Defining the Muslim Faith in the 21st Century. Very interesting as well. So I put this in the description when we publish.
Right. That book was published in the last 2 weeks, actually.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Good. Anything, I don't know, do you want to add something about yourself? Anything the participants should know? Anything to share about yourself, about today?
Well, very briefly, I mean, my career has been primarily journalism. I joined academia in about 12 years ago now. But I liberally plagiarize a colleague of mine who's a BBC foreign correspondent turned professor of communications at London City University, who a number of years ago described himself as a hackademic. And I find that a more appropriate description of myself. My career has been ethnic and religious conflict. And I've been based around the world, in Asia, in the Middle East, in Africa, in the Americas, certainly up until 2000, 6, 2007, there's a little conflict in the world that I had not seen firsthand.
Hmm.
Um, Clearly, much of this has been in the Middle East. In the Middle East, I was based in 10 different countries,
Wow.
uh, and also covered the Middle East from London, from Washington,
Hmm.
from Paris. Um, and so
If
while my broader focus today is the Muslim world, one, Middle East constitutes a very important part of the Muslim world, but a lot of what I do today is
Mhm.
the Middle East.
So how does the reporting change, whether you report from within the Middle East or from US, UK, or Paris?
Well, I mean, the difference, obviously, being on the ground or at least traveling regularly in the region is important because you get a sixth sense, if you wish. It's not just simply uh, interviews, what conversations that you have. It's being in the environment. When I was covering the region from Washington, it was not just the region. I did a lot in Central America and Latin America at the time.
Mhm.
Uh, but it was I wanted Washington for a few years simply because it gave me a far greater understanding
Mm.
of how Washington works.
Right.
And given the role of the United States in the region, understanding how it works is beneficial. And in some ways, that was true. I mean, London and Paris have the added advantage, of course, that they are intellectual centers of the Middle East, often Berlin today, too, often centers where people have a greater degree of greater freedom to express themselves
Hmm.
than they would in their home countries.
Okay. Yeah. Good. So a very international experience, and also from within the Middle East. So let's talk about this. So if I ask you to wrap up some of the latest developments, I mean we're not going to wrap up the whole history of the conflict, but maybe the last, I don't know, weeks, months. Where do we stand today?
Well, uh, where we stand is at the on the cliff on a cliff or on a precipice, basically.
Mm.
Essentially, what you have is a situation. I wrote a piece several days ago about intellectual honesty, and
Mm.
what I argued in that is that historically, the fringe on the left in Israel and the far right were the most intellectually honest parties to the conflict.
Oh.
And what I meant by that is that essentially, if you go back to people like Zev Jabotinsky, who was the sort of ideological godfather of far right Zionism, or even people like the storied defense minister Moshe Dayan,
Hmm.
or somebody like Menachem Begin, who was prime minister, won the elections for the first time. The right wing won the elections, and he was in 1977.
Hmm.
They essentially recognized one Palestinians as human beings. They recognized them as an entity
Hmm.
with aspirations, with rights, with claims to the land. But then they drew the conclusion: there's no room for both of us.
Hmm.
It's either you or me, and in that case, it's me.
Hmm.
Now, that's at least a straightforward. You don't have to agree with it, but it's a straightforward, honest approach.
Yeah.
Compare that today with the far right, which does not recognize Palestinians as human beings, does not recognize that Palestinians have rights, and adopts what I would describe as a supremacist and racist approach to Palestinians.
And you think that's not honest?
Well, Sure, they're honest in saying what they believe, yes.
Okay.
But what I meant, that's why I used the word intellectually honest.
Mhm.
I wanted to draw that distinction. With other words, uh, and that, but the reason this is important is because it goes to the core of the problem.
Mm.
That unless you recognize that you have legitimate rival rights, and therefore are going to have to find a compromise, whatever that compromise may be, you've got a situation where of perpetual conflict,
Yeah.
and the perpetual conflict escalates and it aggravates.
Yeah.
And that's why you get an October 7, which is not to justify October 7 or how Hamas conducted October 7, but it is to explain and understand it.
Mhm.
And you get the response that you've gotten in terms of Israel's war conduct.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's a dead end road.
Yeah. There's no room for compromise as it looks right now. You mentioned space that the previous far right Israeli leaders mentioned that there is not enough space for both. I mean, obviously that refers to some kind of intellectual or whatever space, but not physical
No,
space. And physically
it
speaking,
refers to
yeah,
physical. It refers to physical space.
yeah,
So
yeah,
historic Palestine
yeah.
is, to use the phrase, from the river to the sea,
Mhm.
and historically the far right basically said, "This is ours.
Yeah, they
We
say the
claim
same
it
thing. Yeah.
all. There's no space for anybody else."
Yeah, I understood. I mean, factually speaking, there's probably enough space for everybody. That's what I meant.
Well, even stronger,
Yeah.
contrary to what is a growing body of opinion, that the door on a two-state solution is closed because of Israeli settlements, I think is wrong.
Mm.
And that is not to defend settlements, but that argument comes from people who look at the map and they see the string of settlements that totally cuts up into 1,000 pieces, if you wish,
No,
the West Bank.
no.
And yes, if you look at that map that way, that's accurate.
Mm.
The problem with looking at the map that way is that 80% of Israeli settlers live in settlements that are close to what is called the Green Line being the line between Israel and the West Bank prior to the 1967 Middle East War.
Mhm.
Which means, which is why when you were negotiating the Oslo Accords and later negotiations that took place, the Palestinians and the Israelis were agreeing on a land swap of about 4 to 5% of the land, whereby those 80% of the roughly 750,000 settlers on the West Bank would, in the land swap, would come under Israeli jurisdiction, would be part of the Israeli state. The Palestinians would be compensated with an roughly equal sized piece of land
Mhm.
that would be on, part of Palestine with nothing in between, so uninterrupted. And then you're left with 20% of the Israeli population, which of Israeli settler population, which would have to make a choice:
Mhm.
either move to Israel or accept that they would be living under Palestinian rule.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Or maybe grab out the old one state idea at some point to see if this might be relevant, but it's another discussion.
Well,
Um,
but just very, very briefly on that point,
yeah.
I think one's got to be clear, certainly after what's happened in Gaza, which you're going to have the next 2 or 3 generations impacted by the trauma, much like you saw the first 3 generations after the Holocaust in
Mhm.
Europe.
Mhm.
Uh, I think realistically, the best you can hope for, in terms of relations between an Israeli and a Palestinian state is going to be India and Pakistan.
Mhm.
These are not going to be two states that love each other. And conflict will still have to be managed. On the other hand, if you get a one-state solution, which I'm not, as a matter of principle opposed to, but there you have a recipe, given circumstances as they are, you have a recipe for civil war.
Mhm. So consequently, there's not really a good solution, or maybe some kind of federation or something else. But maybe let's see if we can close the discussion with those more long-term questions at the end. To come back on the current developments. Uh, we discussed yesterday how to structure this talk, and now today is a Friday. We had Friday prayers. We had Haniyeh's funeral. Anything important that happened today that you observed?
Nothing that's that moves the ball as such. I think you're in a situation now where there are a number of things playing at the same time.
Mhm.
Uh, the assassination of Haniyeh, in my mind, Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the political bureau of Hamas, was im- far more important than simply the Gaza war.
Yeah.
Sure, the Israelis have said they are going to hunt down the Hamas leadership no matter where they are, uh, and will do so whenever they have the opportunity. But what's happening within Hamas is in many ways comparable to what happened in the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, with Yasser Arafat between 1972 and 1988. So in 1972, the Palestine Liberation Organization was demanding a unitary Palestinian state in all of historic Palestine.
Mhm.
And it took them 16 years to work through a process in which they recognized Israel and renounced the armed struggle. Hamas is going through that same process. And within that process, Ismail Haniyeh was a moderate.
Yeah.
Now, granted, you can attribute to him correctly any number of blood-curdling statements. And the same was true for PLO officials in the 1970s and 1980s.
Mhm.
But he was a moderate with that. And Israel has had a systematic policy of targeting moderates. That was true with the PLO, and I think that's also true with Ismail Haniyeh. Having said that,
So
what
that, but
the
sorry, if you target the moderate, that means your opponent gets radicalized.
no, what I
No.
mean is that he or she runs the risk of getting killed.
Okay, but if you,
Now, granted, both by militants or more militant parts of their own movements, as well as by the Israelis.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
where I think we stand now is that what the Israeli strikes in Beirut and Tehran have done is put both Hezbollah and Iran in a very difficult position, and they're going to have,
Difficult in which sense?
in terms of balancing their various interests as they decide how to strike back at Israel, and there will be a strike back at Israel without
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
In the Iranian case, Iran does not want an all-out war.
Mhm.
It's made that very clear. It certainly doesn't want a war with the United States because it knows it can't win that.
Mhm.
And it most probably can't win a war against Israel.
Mhm.
Iran has an asymmetric warfare doctrine because of the sanctions. It doesn't have an air force to talk about. Its navy are small ships, and so its non-state allies and its ballistic missiles are the mainstay of Iranian defense.
Mhm.
On the other hand, when the Iranians responded to the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus with a barrage of drones and missiles in April, what they were trying to do, on the one hand, is a very calibrated response that would not provoke an all-out war, but at the same time would raise the level of deterrence.
Yeah, I mean, in April,
The
the Iranian attack in April looked like, okay, we have to respond, but we don't really want to harm. I mean, those rockets
Exactly,
does not.
exactly.
No.
But they also wanted to increase the level of deterrence, and they failed.
Mhm.
They failed with the Israeli response, which was again very calibrated to the missile and drone
Yeah,
attack,
yeah.
and they failed with the
It follow
killing
it,
of.
it felt like it followed the playbook.
Uh, but what I'm getting at is striking back in a way that is not symbolic or just symbolic, and ensuring that the Israeli response to that will be harsh and you get an escalation that spins out of control is going to be very difficult for the Iranians to balance. And the same is true for Hezbollah.
Mhm.
Hezbollah needs to respond, but Hezbollah is a political force in Lebanon, and it needs to take that into consideration, particularly given that Lebanon, in its totality, does not necessarily feel that what's happening in Gaza is its war.
Mhm.
There are very significant segments of the Lebanese population that don't want to run the risk
So
and and feel that they have other problems.
so it gets. I mean, they're already dropping bombs at each other from both sides. If it like is between, for instance, Israel and Hezbollah for months now. And what could now, for instance, in this situation, what could Hezbollah do to do some more, escalate a little bit, but without risking an all-out war? I mean, at some point you're at the limit. No, what would be the limit? What could be potentially overpass the limit?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, the response that that would be logical for Hezbollah would be an attack on a Israeli military facility,
Hmm.
preferably in a major Israeli city, either Tel Aviv or Haifa.
Hmm.
Uh, but that may be crossing red lines with Israel.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the response is. What the proper how they're going to balance this. I
Hmm.
think that it's a dilemma for them,
Hmm. And same for Iran, I guess.
and the same for Iran.
Mm. Another question. Now, since those leaders have been assassinated from Hezbollah and Hamas, in other conflicts in the past, like for instance with, I remember this with ISIS, then like you had a news coverage and said, okay, number two of ISIS has been eliminated, and then 2 months later, number two of ISIS has been eliminated. I mean, they grew, right? New ones are coming after. You kill one, there will be a next one following up. I mean, the positions will be closed by new people. Is that the case here, or are those leaders that have been killed now so important that it's a real impact on the movements?
Both Hezbollah and Hamas are resilient organizations. Everybody, the leaders of Hamas today, the leaders of Hezbollah today, are the successors to people who were killed.
Hmm.
Uh, within within a year of Hamas's founding in 1987 or 1986, its two co-founders were killed within a matter of 3 months.
Right.
Now, interestingly enough, they both were killed after they had proposed to Israel an armistice
Hmm.
in exchange for a Palestinian state alongside Israel,
Hmm.
which goes back to my point about killing moderates. Not that not that the Hamas people at that point were moderate in the sense of the word that you or I would understand it, but nonetheless, um, Hamas leaders have been killed since. Uh, this, and they've shown a great deal of resilience in the 10 months of fighting in Gaza. And the same is true for Hezbollah. So this, targeting the leadership is a short-term victory. What it does is it risks, from Israel's perspective, strengthening the organization. And you're seeing that with all the prayer meetings today and expressions of empathy with Haniyeh.
And how does this
And
how does this strengthen the organization?
basically, from a Palestinian perspective, it's a double-edged sword. So sure, Hamas is co-responsible for what's happening in Gaza and what has happened in Gaza for the last 10 months. But it's also the only organization that's standing up to the Israelis. Most other, certainly the key organizations, including the Palestine Authority led by President Mahmoud Abbas, and Al-Fatah, which is the movement, guerrilla movement turned political movement, which is the backbone of the Palestine Authority, they've lost enormous in credibility. I mean, the Palestine Authority today, either on the West Bank or in Gaza, has no credibility. It's corrupt, it's inefficient, it has mismanaged, and Palestinians would tell you they're subservient to the Israelis and doing the Israelis' dirty work.
Yeah.
And so someone like Ismail Haniyeh becomes a martyr.
Yeah, and that's what you said before. So he was a moderate. That's what I read also from different sources and news outlets and so on. He was actually more moderate in the negotiations. He was the chief negotiator in the ceasefire and hostage release negotiations. So, I mean, what will happen now? If the moderate ones are killed, there are only more radical ones left, and they will take over the negotiations. So it will not definitely not get
Well,
easier.
I don't think it's that simple.
Mhm.
I think what you get, of course, is first of all a delay
Mhm.
because Hamas will have to appoint or elect a successor to Ismail Haniyeh. But it's not that Ismail Haniyeh was the only moderate standing in the organization.
Mhm.
His deputy, who is one front runner for to succeed him now, is a man by the name of Khalil al-Haya,
Mhm.
who in April gave an interview to Associated Press, in which he said Hamas is willing to have a long-term ceasefire with Israel, is willing to lay down its weapons and turn itself into a political party, provided Israel agrees to the creation of an independent Palestinian state
Mhm.
on the West Bank in Gaza.
Mhm.
That's a moderate position.
Yeah.
So it's not like this is the end of moderation. The risk, of course, is that the killing of a moderate or pragmatist, whatever you want to call it, like Ismail Haniyeh, is fodder for the more radical parts of the movement.
Mhm. All right. So maybe a last question before we step to the open mic. So for the participants, somewhere you have a button where you can raise your hand, I think, and then we can let you in if you have questions. And if not, we simply continue. Another question I had about other regional actors, and we're talking now about directly involved actors or countries, Iran, Lebanon, respectively Hezbollah, and so on. But how about Egypt, Jordan, neighboring countries, Syria, Saudi Arabia? What happens with the others? They seem to stay out of the conflict for the moment. Will this remain, or
Well,
what? Yeah.
I mean, look, each of those countries have their own concerns. The Egyptians, first of all, Egypt is the only, together with Jordan and Syria, basically, the only countries which actually border on the conflict.
Mhm.
The Egyptians are heavily involved alongside the Qataris and the Americans in trying to mediate a ceasefire. They have, even if the peace agreement between Egypt and Israel is what the Israelis would call a cold agreement. With other words, there is a very close security relationship. There's interaction between the governments, but there's very little people to people interaction,
Mhm.
which is also, by the way, true for the relationship with Jordan. But the Egyptian concerns are they border on Gaza. And there are enough Israeli statements, certainly on the far right, for Egyptians to fear that what the Israelis really want, even if that may not be the case, what the Israelis really want is to push the Palestinians across the border into Egypt.
To Sinai.
And then there are all the issues of security in the Sinai, where you've had an Islamic State affiliate. There are the issues of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, with Rafah, the Egyptian Gazan border, being crucial and key to this. So the Egyptians are very clearly involved. The Jordanians are in a bind.
Mhm.
Half of their population is of Palestinian descent.
Mhm.
And they, of course, have a historic uh, uh, relationship with the West Bank, because from 1947 to 1960, from 1948 to 1967, the West Bank was Jordanian,
Mhm.
even though the Jordanians they did so in 1983, relinquished their rights to the West Bank in favor of the Palestinians. The Syrians have a close alliance with Iran, and it will be interesting to see that if the response to the killings in Beirut and Tehran this week is a coordinated response between Iran and uh, its allies,
Mhm.
whether Syria will be part of that.
How comes
The
a
Gulf,
question? Yeah, just a question on Syria. I mean, we have seen those attacks on the Golan Heights, on the children on the playing ground, which probably, I don't know. I don't see who might have interest in attacking them. It might have been an accident, but this is according to international law. The Golan Heights belong to Syria, right? Occupied
that,
by Israel,
that's correct.
but not recognized by international law. So it's officially part of Syria. How comes that we did not hear no comment whatsoever from Syria on that attacks?
The Syrians just simply have other problems, and they don't really want to get involved. I mean, legally, under Israeli law, Israel has annexed
Hmm.
the Golan Heights.
Hmm.
Interestingly enough, it has not given the residents of the Golan Heights Israeli citizenship, which doesn't mean that that the residents cannot apply for Israeli citizenship,
It
and
wasn't
many and
wasn't it
and
offered?
many have.
Wasn't it offered the citizenship, and most did not take it?
Yeah, and but a lot have it since then applied and been granted Israeli citizenship,
Okay.
but uh, probably still a majority of the population are Syrian nationals.
Hmm.
And you know, beyond the fact that I don't think Hezbollah would have wanted to be killing children, they also would not have wanted to be killing Syrians.
Yeah,
So
it probably wasn't that.
if it was Hezbollah, something went terribly wrong.
Yeah, apparently they attacked some close by Israeli military stations or something. Though I don't. Well, I don't know.
Well, there have been, I mean, there have been a fair number over the last 10 months, Hezbollah attacks on military facilities in the Golan Heights.
Mhm.
And it's very well possible uh, that they were targeting a military target and something just went very wrong.
Mhm.
But it was an opportunity for Israel, and Israel wasn't going to let that opportunity go by.
No. All right. So again, for participants, if you want to interact, if you want to ask a question to James, or maybe if you have a comment, please raise your hand. There is a button somewhere. If there is, maybe if you can give me a thumbs up if you just see that there is a button, because it's the first time we're trying it. As a moderator, I cannot see it, but there should be a raise your hands button, and then we can.
I'm not sure there is actually.
Oh,
There's okay. There's a react button.
okay. Now
You may
I got a thumbs
the
up. So.
well take that as a hands up. No,
That's
there's actually a hands up.
okay.
If I'm not incorrect, it's the third from the left or the second from the right.
Okay, so it's because normally once you have your hands up, I can get you into the audio
Oh
discussion.
no, the one I just mentioned is a celebrate button.
Okay.
But let's put it this way: if anybody puts up a button, we're going to assume that they would like to ask a question.
Exactly. Good. So we're touching the last minutes of this discussion. Maybe now to put in a more positive perspective. Obviously, I'm not going to ask you any kind of idea for a solution for peace in the Middle East, but I mean, if you're the magic stick, what are your three wishes to bring the region on a more positive pathway, something more positive dynamic? What would have to happen?
Look,
What?
first of all, nothing happens,
Hmm,
nothing positive at least, without a permanent ceasefire and an end to the war.
okay, first wish.
You know, that's a sine qua non.
Hmm.
Um, the next question then is, what's the administration that you're going to have in Gaza? And the problem with the whole discussion about the day after, if you wish, is a discussion in which what Palestinians may want does not figure.
Hmm.
It's irrelevant.
Yeah, that's the
You know,
famous. I thought about this before when you talked about people-to-people interactions. We might have maybe at some point a nice agreement, with nice pictures of leaders, but only on top level, top level agreement, and those are the.
no, you'll have more interaction between Israelis and Palestinians.
Mhm.
First of all, there's a significant Palestinian-Israeli community. In other words, Palestinians with Israeli citizenship
Mhm.
who want to see the creation of a Palestinian state in territory occupied in 1967.
Mhm.
But they want it on the other side of the border, and they're not moving.
Mhm.
You know, they are also Israelis, and many also identify as Israelis, as Israeli Palestinians. You know, that's their identity. Um, so you'll have probably more people to people action. But what I was saying about Palestinians not being recognized in terms of what the post-war administration uh, is going to be goes to a much broader point.
You mean that I know international and foreign powers will impose a government in a, let's say, not very
Well, the
democratic
Israelis
way?
have very clearly said we're going to dictate who it is,
Yeah,
and they're going to be under our tutelage,
sounds extremely democratic.
which I can assure you the vast majority of Palestinians would reject.
Hmm.
But it goes to a much broader point, which is that in many ways, Israel and the Palestinians are mirror images of one another. And unless you get a situation in which Israeli, legitimate Israeli concerns, security, whatever, I mean, if you're a Palestinian in Gaza, going forward, you've got a lot of security concerns.
Hmm.
And unless you have equity in both parties have legitimate concerns, and both of those concerns on both sides have to be addressed, not just the concerns of one party, it's going to be very, very difficult to find a solution.
And
Whether
probably
that's
and probably a third party needs to assure these concerns.
uh, most probably you'll need third party assurances, but again, the main players here are Israelis and Palestinians. They're not third parties,
Mm.
or should not be third parties,
Why should not?
because this is a Palestinian-Israeli issue, and each of those two sides can clearly define what their concerns and what their needs are.
Yeah, but I
And
mean,
that's, and you negotiate to ensure that whatever solution you come up with is equitable for all.
mhm.
I mean, if you don't do that, you've got the seeds of another conflict.
Yeah. No, I mean, agree. That's that the concerns and the needs have to be expressed locally and have to be mutually respected and assured. But personally, I doubt a little bit that this works. Maybe you need a third party just to assure, I don't know, the minimum safety for both sides. So, I don't know.
Well, I mean, you've got an Israeli force that ensures Israelis, the military and so on and so forth, that ensures Israel's safety, and you will need the same thing on the Palestinian side.
Hmm.
And there'll be obviously will have to be close contact and close cooperation between the two.
Who could that be for Palestinians?
Um, there's all kinds of talk of retraining. One, what's called the revitalization of the Palestine Authority. Let's face it, the Palestine Authority is the internationally recognized legal,
Hmm.
together with the PLO,
Hmm.
legal representative of the Palestinians.
Hmm.
So from that standpoint, it's the Palestine Authority that you need to deal with. Palestine Authority is a wreck. It needs to be rebuilt.
Hmm.
Its security forces need to be rebuilt. Now, there are options flying around in terms of, um, there's a man by the name of Mahmoud Dahlan
Hmm.
who's based in Abu Dhabi, is very close to the president of the UAE, Mohammed bin Zayed. He was an Al Fatah security chief in Gaza when the conflict between between Fatah and Hamas erupted, and Hamas took over the Gaza Strip. He's been expelled from the PLO. There were all kinds of corruption charges against him, but he does have something of a base in Gaza, a popular base. Again, not comparable in popularity to someone like Marwan Baghrouti, who's in Israeli prison,
Hmm.
or Ismail Haniyeh when he was alive. But nonetheless, he has close relations in the United States. He has close relations in Israel, and he has uh, good relations with Hamas. Uh, so that's maybe one alternative that theoretically may emerge.
Thanks a lot. I have now William who wants to speak. I'll let you in, William. Just have to figure out how. Oh, yeah, allowed to speak. Please, William, the floor is yours if you can. Let me see. Allowed to speak. I don't know if this is working. I click on
Let
allow.
me tell you, William is a superb editor.
Now he's
You
here.
know, yeah,
William, you need to
Bill.
unmute. Yeah.
Okay, I've got it now.
Hi, William.
Yeah, it seems to me, I was based in Cairo for 5 years and covering the Middle East, and it's very easy to get lost in the weeds of all these Palestinian politics and everything. But it seems to me the issue here is that the Haniyeh assassination didn't make any sense, except that it resolved Netanyahu's domestic problem, which was that if he agreed to a ceasefire, the far right wing of his coalition was going to resign, his government would collapse, and he would be out of power. So by assassinating Haniyeh, Netanyahu saved his position as prime minister, at least for the time being. It seems to me the real question here is how long will the United States continue to support Netanyahu? Netanyahu did not tell anybody in Washington that he was going to make the attack. He stiffed basically Kamala Harris, and he's really disdained Biden. So at some point, if the United States continues to support Israel on a disastrous course, it's going to affect the United States. So at some point, we're going to have to back out. And if we do that, Israel really does not have the kind of protection that it's had up to now. So it seems to me we're heading towards a crisis, and I don't know what the solution to it will be.
Well, Bill, good to hear you. Let me start with, I think you'll forgive me, but I think your analysis of Netanyahu's position is flawed.
Okay.
First of all, we don't know what the fallout of the killing of Ismail Haniyeh on the negotiations will be. There are people, I don't particularly think that's true, but there are people who believe that the killing of Haniyeh and, if confirmed, the killing of Mohammed Deif on July 13, the military commander of Hamas in Gaza, would give him the cover he may need to be more flexible in a ceasefire negotiation. That's one. Two, Netanyahu's had a tremendous boost in popularity this week. And that's something the far right has to take into account.
You mean thanks to these assassinations?
Thanks to the assassinations, yes. And that would even be more solidified temporarily if the Mohammed Deif killing is confirmed. Having said that, the killing of Haniyeh and possibly Deif basically is going to mean that the protests that we've been seeing for months, at least once a week in Israel, 120,000 people, is really going to focus on the hostages and getting the hostages out. And Netanyahu is going to be under a lot of pressure for that. Third of all, and this is where the link to the question about the United States comes, is up until this week, there was nothing that Netanyahu could claim as a real victory in the Gaza war, unless you want to describe the devastation as a victory.
Yeah.
Now he's had a victory. So now, in theory, the pressure to put an end to this, get the hostages out, is going to increase. I don't think what you're going to see in the United States, either before this election, the coming election, or after the election, is a rupture. But you've already seen a change in tone between Kamala Harris and Biden. My guess is you'll see a bit more of that. Again, part of this will be shaped in how Iran particularly, but also Hezbollah, respond to this week's events. I mean, if you get really a configuration with Iran, you'll see the United States rallying behind Netanyahu. But if that is managed by all parties, I think you're going to see some degree of greater pressure, but it's going to be incremental and it's going to be on very specific things. It's not going to be an overall rupture.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure how to assess Netanyahu. I don't think that he wants a ceasefire at any time, and what he wants to do is simply eliminate the Palestinians. But protecting Israel has required an enormous deployment of U.S. Navy ships, and that's really what's protecting Israel. And I don't see that deployment continuing if Israel becomes morally indefensible. I mean, in other words, if it's morally reprehensible because of what it's doing in Gaza, I don't think the United States can afford to continue to simply protect it without asking any questions or exerting any control over it.
Mm.
And
Well,
now
I
he's
mean,
not going to accept any control.
if you think an Israeli-Iranian war through, it's going to be an air war. They
Not
don't.
necessarily.
No,
90
no,
million
I'm
people
leaving.
against 5 million people.
Let me just give me a second. Leave aside now Iran's allies, pure Iran and Israel. They don't have a border. It's not a
Yeah.
question of troops. Israel, Israel clearly has an intelligence network in Iran and has had that for a long time, and that's been obvious prior to the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, but was driven home with the killing. Israel's never deployed its air force against Iran. Now, there's a problem with deploying the air force, and that was a problem that was, widely discussed several years ago when Netanyahu was pushing for a strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. They need to refuel somewhere.
Mm.
And, the question is what Azerbaijan is going to do in that case.
Mm.
So it gets very complicated. Um, the the only real other force, serious force that Israel has to reckon with is Hezbollah. Houthis are a problem, but that's the only really ground force that also has a significant missile capability.
So I have a follow-up question to this assassination. I don't know, James, how far you see inside the decision-making process, but if, as some say, we have heard it also that maybe Netanyahu, tasks these assassinations mainly for his personal political agenda. I mean, how is that possible? Where are the checks and balances? Can one man just decide and serve his own agenda, and nobody's there to balance or correct, or what's
Well,
yours?
first of all, Israel's had a targeted assassination policy for decades.
Mhm.
It's not Netanyahu's policy. The Labor government had that policy. So and ultimately the decision on whether or not to execute a target is the prime minister's decision,
Mhm.
irrespective of who the prime minister is.
Mhm.
Fact of the matter is, look, Netanyahu is on the one hand, my reading of Netanyahu is, on the one hand, he's on the far right. I mean, his buddies are people like Trump, like Narendra Modi, like Viktor Orban. Those are the people he feels comfortable with. But he's also he's a political master and a cat with 9 lives, and he's an opportunist. Fact of the matter is that his inclinations at the moment coincide with what the far right wants, particularly the far right in his cabinet.
Mhm.
And I think you've also got to keep in mind that the problem of the far right in Israel having gained so much currency is structural. It's not one man.
Mhm.
Part of the problem with the conduct of the war has to do on where these soldiers come from. There's an increasingly religious contingent, and it's not just one brigade. I mean, these are not ultra orthodox, but they're religious, and they come often out of yeshivas, religious seminaries that have a military component and that are on the far right extreme.
Mm.
So, this is, even if Netanyahu were to go, fundamentally, policy is not going to change.
Yeah.
The tone may change, some of the rough edges may change, but fundamentally, Benny Gantz, the former defense minister who recently resigned from the war cabinet and led to the dissolution of the war cabinet, fundamentally, he and Netanyahu don't disagree on what the Israeli-Palestinian future should be. And Benny Gantz is viewed as a mainstream figure.
Mm. Yeah. So difficult times even to think about change for I don't know, long term or midterm positive evolution of this situation. Yeah, we went quite some over time, but it was extremely exciting and fascinating. Do you have any closing remarks, James?
Not really. I mean, I think, what I said, the ceasefire is a sine qua non.
Hmm.
Without a ceasefire, you're going to be balancing on a cliff continuously. Um, but then you're going to need, if you really want to resolve this, a concerted effort to bang heads and bring people together. But it's going to have to be one that's equitable,
Hmm.
and
But
that's a tall order.
but
That's a tall order.
for equity, if I may hit this last question, for equity, don't you need two actors of the same quality? I mean, two states.
No, I mean, look, what you need. No, I mean, ultimately, that's where you need to get. You need to get two states. But what I'm getting at is, what I mean with equity is, Palestinian concerns are as valid as Israeli concerns are.
Hmm.
And that has to be the basis of it. It's not the basis of it today.
Hmm.
I mean, just put yourself in the shoe of a Palestinian in Gaza. So an Israeli is continuously afraid that he's going to be hit by a rocket.
Hmm.
A Palestinian's afraid that he's going to be bombed,
Yeah, or starving, or
or whatever it is. It's a mirror image,
Hmm.
and you need to start recognizing that.
Yeah.
That has to be the basis of a policy.
Mutually, you mean recognize? Yeah, mutually recognizing.
Not only, going back to Bill's question, the United States.
Hmm.
I think that, I would say universally it has to be the operating principle.
Hmm.
Now, that's right now pie in the sky, and I realize that. But to really get a healthy development towards um, a situation in which people live side by side
Yeah.
in relative peace,
Yeah.
that's going to have to be the operating principle.
That's what you all hope for, and that's what everybody, all actors, should work for, which unfortunately is not the case, but we hope for that. Thanks a lot, James, and also William, for your contribution.
And thank you to the audience for joining.
Thanks for the audience for joining, and we're going to put the recording out as quickly as possible, and looking forward for next event.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
It was a big pleasure. Thank you very much. Have a good time.
All the best.
Bye bye.